A big night by Francisco Lindor and Brandon Nimmo led the Mets to their 5th straight win. When the stars are showing up like that, does this team really need another bat?
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Well, on Friday night, Francisco Lindor had a big game, and we all know what that means. The Mets won handedly. When Lindor is rolling, this team just goes off, and that gives me a lot of encouragement moving forward that if Francisco Lindor gets hot over the final 8 weeks of the season, or however many weeks we have left, 9 weeks of the season, this lineup is going to be just fine because they looked outstanding on Friday night, and they were going up against one of the best pitchers in baseball in Logan Webb. But you had Brandon Nimmo, who has settled into that leadoff spot. He hits a leadoff double. Lindor gets a base hit to put runners at first and third for Juan Soto. He then steals second base. So you have 2 runners in scoring position. Soto grounds out to score Nimmo and to advance Lindor to third. Pete Alonso hits the sacrifice fly. A little bit of small ball, and the Mets are up 2-0 before Clay Holmes takes them out. 2 innings later, Francisco Lindor hit his 20th home run of the season, a solo shot over that high wall out in right field. Not easy to go yard in that ballpark in San Francisco, but a nice big blast for Lindor to give the Mets at the time a 3-1 lead. They then rallied for 3 more runs in the 4th inning as you had the hitters at the bottom of the lineup, the young hitters, who turned it over well. Brett Baty, leadoff single. Francisco Alvarez gets a base hit after that. Ronnie Mauricio draws a walk to load the bases. Tyrone Taylor from the 9-hole grounds out, but luckily he beat out the double play. So the Mets score a run on the play. Taylor then steals second base ahead of Nimmo, or during Nimmo's at bat, and then Nimmo gets another hit to drive in 2. Just like that, the Mets were up 6-1. They tacked on a pair of insurance runs in the 9th inning as Luis Angel Acuna was hit by a pitch, and then after Tyrone Taylor and Brandon Nimmo each struck out, Lindor hit one into the left field corner that put 2 runners in scoring position for Juan Soto. 1 run scored on a wild pitch, and then Soto got a base hit to score Lindor. So just a huge night from this offense, and it starts with the very top. When you have Brandon Nimmo, Francisco Lindor, and Juan Soto all having multi-hit games, you're going to win. It's that simple. Nimmo, 2 for 5, 2 RBIs and a run scored. Lindor, 3 for 5 with the home run and 3 runs scored. Soto, 2 for 5 with 2 RBIs. He also had a double, and then Pete Alonso had the sac fly, didn't do much else. But this lineup, when you get that production, it really does overshadow any issues on the bottom of the lineup. And, in this game, you had Tyrone Taylor, who didn't really do much. He avoided a double play with the bases loaded. That's the best contribution you got out of him. He has been an absolute albatross to this lineup whenever he's out there. He's just brutal. He's just not a good offensive player. Outstanding defender, great 4th outfielder. Should not be a starting center fielder. And that might be a position the Mets are going to address at this deadline. But really, you have so much firepower at the top of this lineup. With those 4 guys, with Nimmo, Lindor, Soto, and Alonso, and Jeff McNeil batting 5th, you just have a very strong top of the lineup that can really overcome the bottom. And honestly, the bottom of the lineup has not been bad. David Stearns talked about it. He said over the last 2 to 4 weeks, they feel good about the production they've gotten from the bottom of their lineup. What he didn't say is that part of the reason why this lineup has struggled, he mentioned the not hitting with runners in scoring position, but it's been the stars. It's been Lindor. It's been Alonso that have really held this lineup back when some of these other guys have started going. Now, if you get Lindor hot, you get Alonso hot, you keep Nimmo and Soto hot, I mean, this team is just going to be so dangerous. They get 10 hits in the game. They score 8 runs. I look at this lineup right now, and I really feel like they are at least 6 deep on any given night because it's those 5 guys that we talked about at the top. And Brett Baty is just a certified good at bat at this point. And probably goes 7 deep because all of a sudden Francisco Alvarez looks better in the box. But even if it's not him, Ronnie Mauricio has been very solid. And, Mark Vientos, when he's been in there lately, he has been better. So we'll talk about it a little bit more in the final segment today about the Mets' needs at the trade deadline. They pulled off their first big move. Gregory Soto was traded from the Orioles to the Mets. For those of you who did not catch the show I did a live stream right after the news dropped. So you can check that out on our YouTube channel or the podcast feed where I broke down the trade, broke down what it means for the Mets bullpen, and also talked about the return going the other way. The Mets are still going to be pursuing more help for the bullpen. We're going to talk about in the next segment Clay Holmes' performance in this start and whether he might push the Mets to go out and get an arm, and maybe you slide Holmes into the bullpen because he's looking a little fatigued. But when you talk about the offensive side of the game for the Mets right now, it is hard to find the bat that's out there that will upgrade this team more than the internal options they have in place. Because if you're just talking about an offensive team, I find it hard to believe that the Mets are going to do a lot better at this deadline than the at-bats that they're getting from Ronnie Mauricio. And if the move is to get a center fielder to slide Jeff McNeil into the infield so that you get Mauricio out of the lineup, I don't know if the Mets are going to be a better offensive team. Now, defensively, different story. And running into a playoff series or a playoff run with Jeff McNeil as your starting center fielder is a bold move. But again, we'll talk about more in the final segment. I'm starting to get to the point with these young infielders where I don't think the Mets are in a position to trade any of them. And again, I want to go through that a little bit more. But first, we got to talk about this start from Clay Holmes because it was the definition of bend, don't break. But boy, was he bending. And it took a lot of pitches to get through 5 innings. And this is not the same pitcher that was flatly dominant in May and in early June. He's definitely going through some struggles. And I don't know if he's really going to be able to make it the distance of this season and survive the marathon as a starting pitcher. So I want to go through that before we talk about the bats more. So we'll get to all of that here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute that you want to head to the ballpark with your friends and family and check out a game? Maybe it's game day and you just suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. Well, that's exactly where Game Time comes in. It is the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices actually drop on the app the closer you get to first pitch. That's why I don't buy my tickets until I'm walking towards the security line. And even sometimes then I wait till after security. I'm just waiting until I'm about to get in the ballpark and they're ready to scan. And that's when I grab my tickets. It's so easy to buy. Two taps, you're all set. And Game Time is the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming MLB game. Like if you're on the West Coast, check out Mets vs. Giants. Or if you're on the East Coast, wait till the Mets come home to face the Giants next weekend. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. Be awesome to get there by the deadline. We're about 100 away, so I really do appreciate all of you who continue to hit that subscribe button. Let's talk about Clay Holmes in this start. Again, the definition of he bent, but he did not break. But boy, his command was awful. And it was surprising with how all over the place he was. I mean, the amount of times where Francisco Alvarez is just reaching up to the heavens trying to catch a wayward pitch by Clay Holmes, and yet somehow he only walked one batter in the first inning. He did get better throughout the start. Early, I don't think he was going to get much further than that first inning because he was just all over the place. Gave up a leadoff single, then a double to Rafi Devers. Gets a ground out where the Mets might have been able to gun down a runner at the plate, as Mauricio, I think, had time with how hard that ball was hit to come home with it. Unfortunately, he bobbled it, came to first, did get an out there. Holmes was then able to, after issuing that one walk, he got a line out to Soto, then a comebacker. He made a horrible throw to first. Pete Alonso bailed him out. He was bailing everybody out. Great game by Pete Alonso defensively over at first base. In the second inning, he made a great play going into foul territory to field a ground ball, made a solid throw to Clay Holmes at first to get an out. Then Francisco Lindor made a brutal throw. Pete dug it out. So just a great game by Pete defensively. Third inning, Holmes gives up a leadoff single, which he erased by getting a well-placed rocket off the bat of Rafael Devers. They had the infield shifted, so Ronnie Mauricio was almost playing more towards the shortstop position. Maybe if the shortstop was shaded a little bit to the left, you had Lindor standing basically on the second base bag. So it ends up being the rare 5-6-3 double play. Huge ground ball for Holmes to get, but again, an absolute missile. 106 miles per hour off the bat by Devers. So the Mets were fortunate that ball was hit right at Mauricio, because hit anywhere else, that's a base hit, and then Willy Adames doubled. So it could have been a completely different game. Instead, the Mets were fortunate that double came with nobody on base. Then another great play by Pete Alonso as Ronnie Mauricio fields a ground ball, errant throw to first. You could say Pete Alonso tagged Matt Chapman, but I almost felt like the ball tagged Matt Chapman. Pete was just trying to catch it, and yes, he did swing the glove around, I guess, to make the tag, but really, it felt like it's almost like when Luis Torrens will gun down a runner at second and he throws the ball into the runner. Ronnie Mauricio threw the ball into Matt Chapman's head, and luckily Pete Alonso caught it, so it didn't beat him, and his glove carried on to graze the top of Chapman's helmet, and they got a out on a replay review. So Pete, again, had a great game defensively. We'll talk about more in the next segment. The one thing I'm a little concerned about is Ronnie Mauricio's defense at third base. Better than Mark Vientos, but then again, Mark Vientos had a whole season last year playing every single day from June on to get acclimated. And I think by the end of the season last year, Vientos was playing better defense than what we're seeing out of Mauricio right now. So something we'll talk about more in the next segment. But getting back to Holmes, he had an easy 1, 2, 3, 4th inning. In the 5th inning, he gave up 2 singles, got Elliot Ramos to pop out, and then they let him face Rafi Devers, which I was a little bit surprised by. He strikes him out, one of his 2 strikeouts on the day, then gets Adames to pop up to get out of the jam. So if you really look at it, a great start by Clay Holmes to go through all those high leverage spots and wiggle his way out of it to go just 1 run. But this is not the same guy that we saw 6 weeks ago. I mean, he's just not there. I think Clay Holmes next season, when he has a full off season after building up this workload, this is a guy that could be an all-star. He can be a frontline starting pitcher. He is that good. He is able to handle this role, but you're talking about a huge innings jump. 63 innings pitched the last 2 years before this one. And now he's up to 113 2/3. If you look at the pitches that he's thrown, he's 2 starts away from doubling the highest amount of pitches he's ever thrown in a season, which makes sense because he's about there when it comes to the innings. He threw about 70 innings, I think 4 years ago. And so he might take a little bit of time to get up to 140. But when it comes to the pitches thrown, again, I think the most he's thrown is about 1,200 pitches in the season. And he's about at 1,900 right now. Let me look at the exact number. It surprised me when I was looking at his MLB.com page. Most pitches he's thrown in a season, 1,124. That was back when he threw 70 innings, split between the Pirates and the Yankees in 2021. Right now it's at 1,892, and you figure 2 more starts probably gets about to 2,100. So 1,000 more pitches than he's ever thrown in a season. It's a massive workload for Clay Holmes. And he's all of a sudden not quite as effective at pitching himself out of situation with runners in scoring position. They showed that stat up, which it was unsustainable what he was doing through his first 16 starts or whatever it was, where guys were hitting like 100 against him. But over the last 3 prior to this one, guys were hitting like 667 against him with runners in scoring position. The strikeouts are coming down. It seems like he's never even close to being able to get through 6 innings. The Mets are in a very interesting spot with Clay Holmes right now, because if they don't trade for a starting pitcher, you need Clay Holmes to stay in the rotation as long as possible. The longer he stays into the rotation, the less you need of a Paul Blackburn. Yes, the Mets do have a couple of pitching prospects that are knocking on the door with Noel McLean and Brandon Sproat, but those guys might go through some lumps once they hit the big leagues. It's a tough adjustment. And if Clay Holmes is 5 and dive, but he's given up 2 runs or less every time 5 or dive, that's probably more valuable than he's going to be in the bullpen. And you can't just assume that if you shorten up Clay Holmes and stick him in the bullpen, he's going to be the same guy that was a closer for the Yankees at times and a really good late inning guy. He does have that experience to draw on. And I think come October, yeah, Clay Holmes can get some big outs for you out of the bullpen. But I just don't know when they make that move. But this is the first time, and I guess it's been something I've kicked around in my mind a little bit, but this was the first time where he was just nowhere near the zone in that first inning. I'm just starting to think, all right, maybe this team's better off with a different option in their rotation and seeing if you can still shorten up Holmes and make him a weapon out of that bullpen. It's just something that they have to be considering to some level. I know they're saying publicly, oh, well, Clay Holmes is going to be a starting pitcher the whole season, and they want to keep him on that routine. But even you saw last year, and granted they were protecting a trade asset, but the White Sox with Garrett Crochet, he was not able to go the whole distance going from reliever to starter. They eventually had to shorten him up. Ronaldo Lopez did not make it through the whole season last year. So when you look at Clay Holmes and where he's at right now, getting pretty close to 120 innings pitched, he'll get there probably 2 starts from now because I don't think he's going to go 6 1/3 in his next start. I do start to wonder if he's the best option for this rotation. I think for now he is still, but you might want to shorten him up once you get to September. And getting another starting pitcher will go a long way to doing that. You always could potentially let Paul Blackburn pitch out of that rotation too, and or maybe piggyback those guys and where you have home start, and I guess that's where Blackburn comes in as a long man. I don't know, but again, you do start to wonder, is this sustainable for the New York Mets? For now, give him a couple more starts. You know, you're going to pitch him one more time. He's the guy that goes twice before the deadline. So you let him have that start and you just see what's available, because I just don't know, as David Stearns talked about today when he was addressing the trade for Soto, for Gregory Soto, that is, he mentioned that for one, he doesn't even know if there's going to be many other left-handed relievers moves. That's why they jumped on the trade for Soto. But also, he said he doesn't know how many impact arms will be moved. And he talked about wanting a ceiling raiser if the Mets were going to address their rotation. Is there a ceiling raiser? We're going to talk about that as we sort of close the show, talking about everything related to the Mets and the trade deadline with all the rumors that we have right now. So we'll get to all of that good stuff here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Day Hugh, and so is this hat that I'm wearing for Mets fans like me. This one hits the mark. Game Day Hugh makes clean, no logo gear with team-inspired colorways for every pro and college fan base. It's all about letting your colors speak for you. No giant logos, just smart, versatile style that works on game day, on the course, or anywhere in between. The hat pairs perfectly with my usual gear. It doesn't replace my team's logo stuff. It just adds to the lineup. It's the kind of hat that reps your team without screaming it. It's subtle, but still it says everything. And it's not just hats. You can also check out their split shade gloves made for the golf course. Super comfortable. I just played my first round with them actually this week, and I am a big fan. The perfect gift for the fan who has everything. And right now you can get 15% off with the code MLB15 at GameDayHue.com. That's GameDayHue, HUE.com. The code even stacks on bundle deals. So now it's the time to load up. Let your colors talk, because colors speak louder than words. That's GameDayHue.com, code MLB15. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. So today, when the Mets traded for Gregory Soto, I let the insiders know first before I worked on anything else regarding the news. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the trade deadline. First and foremost, what David Stearns was talking about as it relates to the starting pitching market. Is there a ceiling raiser for the New York Mets to go after? Apparently, they were in contact with the Marlins about Sandy Alcantara and have balked at the price because the Marlins are still asking for a steep return for a guy that is pitching to an ERA over 5 at least, maybe over 6. Yes, Trace's 6.66 ERA right now. His last start, though, was a 7-inning gem. So we'll see if that start alone is enough to get him moved. But I don't know if Sandy, The one thing I would say about trading for Sandy is I do love him for next year. I do love the upside of a guy that has won a Cy Young before. And I would be in on that in some respects. But what you're going to have to give up to get him, for right now, I don't know if it makes sense to make that move at this very moment. In some respects, you might be better off trying to make that move in the offseason and letting the year play out and seeing if Sandy does salvage some stuff in the final couple of months. You look at Dylan Cease, he's on the market now. Is that really viable? I talked about that a bit on yesterday's show. I don't believe it is. I think the Mets would have to have the pieces that could work for the Padres to have a trade where they're getting something back that helps them for now. And I just don't know what the Mets have that package. I mean, theoretically, sure. Could you give them a back end starting pitcher like a Paul Blackburn or a Tyler McGill, who's, we don't even know exactly when's going to be healthy, but just some guy that fills up a spot in their rotation and then you throw prospects at them for Cease? Yeah, but I don't think that's what they want. I think if they were going to make the trade, they would want a bona fide starting left fielder. Really, I think they want to trade Dylan Cease for Jarren Duran, and who knows if that's going to happen. So if Cease is not on the table, if Alcantara's not on the table, if Zach Gallen is either not on the table or is on the table, but how good is he? How much does he raise your ceiling when he's got an ERA over 5? Who's the name? And I think the one name that's out there is Seth Lugo. You don't even know if Seth Lugo is going to want to come and be a Met. Not that he'd have any choice in the matter. He doesn't have a no trade clause. But if he's going to come here and, feel like, oh, this is the team that screwed up my career and never let me start, and I had this in me the whole time, and they've cost me tens of millions of dollars, it might not be the fit. So the more you look at what's out there, it does become hard to envision the Mets being able to address this rotation, which is where you get back to the idea of, hey, if Clay Holmes is 5 and dive, build a super bullpen, figure it out. You can always add McLean and or Sproat to the roster and have them make spot starts down the stretch when you need them, because the Mets won't really need to make a spot start in front of Kodai Senga until the end of August. And you can go from there. And so maybe it makes sense to just add to the pen, which gets me to the final part of the show today, which is, do the Mets need to trade one of their infielders? And that's sort of been one of the assumptions about this deadline. The Mets might take the opportunity to trade from their glut of young infielders and avoid having to give up prospects. Here's the thing. For those of you who listen to the show for the last couple of weeks that we've been doing all this deadline coverage, the guy that has value on the market that is expendable is Ronnie Mauricio. Brett Beatty, he's a starter on this team right now. He's playing great defense. He's giving you really good at bats. He's been on a roll lately for the past month and change here. You're not, and they talked about on the broadcast today, Brett Beatty during this hot stretch has the lowest chase rate in all of baseball. He's giving you great at bats. He's an everyday player right now. So whether he's your starting third baseman or your starting second baseman, he's a starter. You're not moving him. Luis Acuna, I think the Mets love him as a utility man for now, who could be a super utility man one day, but he is quick. He wins baseball games off your bench. He is the perfect guy to be a bench player on this team that's trying to win for the next 5 years. So in that sense, does it make sense to move him? To me, absolutely not. It just doesn't. And I think you also have to remember, these guys are helping you win now. You can't trade a piece that's helping you win. And that brings me to Vientos and Mauricio. I think if you trade Mark Vientos now, you are trading low. Now, if it was a Vientos for Eugenio Suarez direct swap and you had the piece that the Diamondbacks wanted, they wanted Vientos over the prospects that are getting offered, I can understand making the win now World Series move and just hoping that, I don't know if you hope that Vientos is not going to become a star, but just accepting that Vientos as the first baseman of the Diamondbacks, so that's probably what would happen long term. Mark Vientos could absolutely blossom into being a star, the same way Christian Walker did at a later age for the Diamondbacks. That could happen. But again, if that was the piece that got you Suarez, great. I just don't think that you're going to be able to pull off the 1-for-1. I don't know if the Diamondbacks are going to want a Mark Vientos, a defensive limited player, when they have Jordan Lawler, who could be their third baseman of the future. They extended Geraldo Perdomo, and they have Ketel Marte. Their infield's in a pretty good spot. They have Pavin Smith and others that can fill that first base spot that just got vacated by trading Josh Naylor. Yeah, sure, they could fit in Mark Vientos, but would they prefer whatever collection of prospects is going to be offered for Suarez? I think so. So again, I don't think that Vientos has the value to necessarily get you what you want. I think Mauricio does. But let's just say that the move at the deadline is to get Luis Robert. We've talked about that on this show a lot lately. Or maybe it's Harrison Bader, or maybe it's Cedric Mullins, or maybe it's Willie Castro. Any of those names that we've talked about. Castro would be an infielder that would plug up second base probably. I mean, he's a utility guy, but I think that's where he played for the Mets. All those other guys are center fielders. If you make one of those moves, and let's just say it is Robert, and I have been advocating for Luis Robert lately because he mashes against left-handed pitching. He brings you speed and defense. He is basically a better version of Tyrone Taylor because there's more upside with the bat. He's a guy that has 38 home runs in a season on his resume a couple years ago. And I think getting him out of that horrible situation in Chicago, putting him in the locker next to Juan Soto and hoping something rubs off, I really do think that Luis Robert's the type of guy that you can pick up and he could just spark you down the stretch, and he could be an absolute huge boon to this offense. He has an incredible ceiling. Floor is pretty awful. He's been awful against awful against right-handed pitching this year. But if that's the case, you can have a platoon of Jeff McNeil and Luis Robert with Tyrone Taylor giving you the ability to, on games where you start McNeil, you sub in Taylor, you still have Luis Robert as a lefty masher off the bench. It makes a lot of sense for the Mets to get Robert. But in that case, if they get Robert and he proves to only be able to hit left-handed pitching, then you're back into a situation where you probably want to move Jeff McNeil against righties to start. And if you traded Mauricio to get Robert or to get Bednar or whatever reliever you want, well, now what are you left with at second base? You're left with Vientos is playing well enough defensively to handle third, and you have Beatty at second, or you have Acuna at second. And honestly, you're probably not going to get much when it comes to the defense. Now, when it comes to the bat. When it comes to Ronnie Mauricio, defensively, I do wonder, is he good enough to start for you in a playoff game? He is not the best defensive player, and when he makes mistakes, they're often mental mistakes. Physically, when it comes to his arm, he's as gifted as they come. Former shortstop, playing third base, has the range, has soft enough hands, but he might get at times, for lack of a better word, lazy defensively. It might get caught flat-footed. How is he going to show up in a playoff series? I don't know, but at the same time, I think he shows up better than Vientos defensively. And I just think he is an insurance policy that teams love to have, where if something happens at any of your infield positions, Ronnie Mauricio is a guy that you can plug in that can give you a good at-bat from the left side. So the more I think about what the Mets are after at this deadline, should they go after Luis Robert? Absolutely. Should they trade Ronnie Mauricio or any of their infielders for Luis Robert? Not a chance. They have a ton of pitching in their farm system. That's what afforded them the ability to trade for Gregory Soto a week early and not even really feel it in their system. And again, I talked about that return a little bit more on the full episode I did on the trade, but it was a 20-year-old who you just developed that you signed for tens of thousands of dollars that you've now developed at 20 years old to be a guy that teams are really coveting out of St. Lucie. But I mean, those types of guys are dimes a dozen that you can still develop more of. You turn a 14th round pick, I believe, who's a reliever, into another prospect that the Orioles wanted to get a top left-handed arm who throws gas. So the point being, that is still the strength of the Mets farm system. That is still an area that they can use to address their bullpen further. They can take two more arms out of their bullpen and turn it into another late inning reliever. Maybe it's a Jack Weninger, a guy who is thriving in Double-A as a starting pitcher. So it's a tougher prospect to deal, a guy that hurts a little bit more, but a little bit of a higher ranked prospect could afford you a little bit of a better reliever, and you can fill that bullpen just with your arms. I really believe that's the case. And when it comes to Luis Robert, I think the best I would give up is Drew Gilbert for him, and I don't even know if I would do that. If I'm taking on all the money for Luis Robert, I don't know if I want to even trade Drew Gilbert. But to me now, I think the piece that I would give up that's closest to the big leagues is Gilbert. And he's been great lately. And he's really improving his trade value in July, hitting 338, 403 on base, 723 slug, 6 home runs. And I believe it's like 17 or 18 games this month. And he had a 2 home run game in the second to last game in June. So if you're looking at like a 20 game stretch, he has 8 home runs. That's going to play, and 3 multi home run games mixed in during that stretch. Do I think that Drew Gilbert's going to be a 20 home run hitter in the big leagues? Do I think Drew Gilbert has the PCA nightmare in him where you trade him and he becomes an all-star? I don't think so. I think Drew Gilbert at best is a starting center fielder for a second division team, which is not a bad thing. That's still a really great outcome for him. And there is a world where he's a starting center fielder for the Mets, but I think if you're looking at the long-term vision of what this team's going to be, you have Nimmo on left, you have Soto on right, and I think Carson Bench is supposed to be the long-term answer in center field. You have Nick Morabito, you have AJ Ewing, you have other center fielders who have a lot of speed that might fit a fourth outfielder profile just as well, if not better than Drew Gilbert. So Drew Gilbert is a guy that I would deal in the right trade. I don't know if I would do it for Luis Robert. I think I probably would. Just because if Luis Robert helps you win a World Series, then it's a completely different story. And you never know what you can get. It's a guy that might be the kerosene to your fire that just ignites this lineup. But the more I think about it, Ronnie Mauricio, and again, I did a show about him before I left on my vacation where I said Ronnie Mauricio can save the farm at the deadline. I think the farm's in good enough shape that it doesn't have to be saved. I think you can trade from that middle tier of your farm system, not the absolute top. I think the Mets can make it through this deadline without trading Jet Williams, Carson Bench, or their top 3 pitching prospects in Jonah Tong, Nolan McLean, or Brandon Spur. I think they can hang on to all 5 of those guys. And I honestly think they could probably hang on to their power bats and Ryan Clifford and Jacob Reimer. That's 7 guys that I think you could hold on to that'll still give you a great farm moving forward. You have such a glut of pitching prospects that you can move 3 of those arms, 4 of those arms, whatever it has to be to get everything you need at this deadline. And if you have to give up something to get the bat or the arm, I think Drew Gilbert is the type of prospect that can get a deal done. Because you look at the Pirates, they could use an outfielder. You look at the Royals or the trade Seth Lugo, what do they want? They want an outfield help. So I think Drew Gilbert is a guy that would be very attractive to a lot of these teams. And if you trade him to get something on this deadline, the way you have to look at it is, and I said this before on the show, but I'll say it again, you traded Justin Verlander, who you just signed. So you basically just bought prospects and were able to nab Drew Gilbert and Ryan Clifford. And if you traded Gilbert and you hung on to Clifford, you still have a prospect that's probably a better prospect from that trade. And you turn Gilbert into a piece you need for a potential World Series run. So I think that's where I'm at right now. When it comes to position players, I think Drew Gilbert will move the needle in trades. I think Ronnie Mauricio will really move the needle in trades, but I don't think the Mets are going to get the bat back that makes Ronnie Mauricio's place on this current Mets team obsolete. And even if you trade for Robert, and because you still have Starling Marte, the move is to demote Ronnie Mauricio and let him play every day in Syracuse for a month and just work on his swing. I think come September, he'd be a call-up, and I think he'd still probably factor in some playing time down the stretch. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if, depending on how Robert hit, you might make your playoff roster, you might leave a Starling Marte off of it or something along those lines, where all of a sudden you're still rostering Ronnie Mauricio, and you might even be starting him because Jeff McNeil's in center field come October. So I think the more that I've thought about it, I'm kind of moving off the idea that the Mets should trade any of the young infielders. It is something that probably has to be addressed at some point, but I think that point is in the offseason where a hot playoff run could change the value for any of these guys. If Vientos strings together 2 good months to close out the season, he might be the guy you decide to move because defensively, he doesn't fit your team. And if you resign Pete Alonso, you might decide, you know what, it's time to cash in on Mark Vientos. I love Vientos. I've loved him as a prospect. I love what he did last season. I wouldn't want to see him go, but my point stands that the value that you're going to get for these guys, it stands probably just as good of a chance to be higher in the offseason than it is at this very moment. And each of these guys could end up being a starter for you in the playoffs. And I just don't think you should give up any of that depth right now to get, at this point, a bat that's probably not going to be the perfect fit anyway. The only exception to the rule is if you are the team that ends up with Eugenio Suarez. And if the Mets are, and they had to give up Mauricio or Vientos to do it, I'll understand it because he is a legitimate game-changing bat. But the amount of teams that are in on Suarez just makes me think that that's not likely. And so I come around to the point where I just think the Mets got to bolster that bullpen, make it as good as possible, be opportunistic in the starting pitching market to see if there is a Lugo or somebody like that that becomes available that makes sense to go after. And if not, I'm almost looking at this team and saying, you know what? They got a lot in-house that's going to do a lot more for them than what they're going to get on the market. But we'll see. We'll see. This conversation will continue to be ongoing because the rumors never stop this time of year. And that's why this show, as always, will continue every single day. You'll have an episode every morning breaking down the latest game and the latest rumors. And if something happens, I'll be going live as soon as I possibly can to break down the latest trade. As always, thank you all for listening. Make sure if you're listening on the audio side, you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, put the notification bell on so you know whenever I'm going live or where Chris Schubert is going live for our Lock the Mets postcast that happened after the final out of every game. Even late West Coast game, Chris still got to show up, so make sure you check that out. If you're an everydayer, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. Find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Our Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.